Hello, welcome to our fifth video in a series of videos on essentials for astrological research, and we are up to our fifth rule, which is to avoid selection bias in gathering data. Bias in research methods means that the data we're looking at, the information that we're getting from the data, is being slanted. It's being tilted away from what we think we are looking at. So we think we're looking at something straight on, but we're actually getting a distorted view, or we're not looking at what we think we're looking at. It's being biased, being tilted, it's being twisted away from what we think we are looking at. And selection bias in collecting data is arguably the most critical, common problem and very underrated. The effects of selection bias are often much greater than we intuitively think they will be. Selection bias is also called cherry picking. In other words, that you are picking data to fit your theory. But selection bias can be very unconscious. It can be subtle in the way it works, but powerful in its effects. And therefore we can say it's insidious. It just creeps into what we're doing without our being fully aware of it. So it's good to be extremely careful to avoid selection bias. And one way to avoid selection bias is, number one, state very clearly how you're collecting the data and what the rules are for collecting the data, and make those rules so that it is as difficult as possible for you to have any direct control over what charts you are analyzing. So in the case of the 10 people with ADHD, you want to state the rule very clearly that you have chosen all charts of clients that, to your knowledge, have been diagnosed by a therapist or some other professional as having ADHD. It's a clear criterion. However, maybe that's not what you're doing. Maybe it's just the person told you they have ADHD and you didn't confirm it. That's okay. Just be clear about what you're saying. And probably what's really happening is it's the people you remember who told you that they have ADHD, and you actually did not record each time a client came in, or you don't have a file where you've notated all these things. So you're doing it from recollection and then going back and finding the charts. If that's what you're doing, be honest about it. Just say that, you maybe you have a physical folder, or you have more likely you just have the chart data, and you can state what you did. You could say that you went into your astrology software and you pulled up the names of all of your clients you have ever had. You looked at each one and tried to recall whether they told you that they had ADHD. And if you have a clear memory that they did tell you this, then you included them in the study. By stating it very clearly, it becomes transparent to everybody what's going on. And sometimes in stating it, you realize that there's something you could do a little bit better. So I just can't emphasize it enough. Just specifying as clearly as possible, and to the best of your ability, make it so that you don't have any control over the selection of the data. Now, if all you have is your memory is subject to unconscious selection bias, but there's nothing we can do about it. So you're doing the best you can with the data you have. That's all that's required. Research is never perfect. Research doesn't happen in an ivory tower in a perfect world. We deal with the reality of the situation we're in, and if that's the reality of the situation that you're in, that's fine. So I just want to go over all this so that you're comfortable knowing that all you have to do is give it your best effort to make it clear what you're doing and to acknowledge what limitations there are in that procedure. Now, selection bias in astrology, I think it's fair to say, is the standard way that astrology is done. I mean, we in astrology we don't take selection bias seriously, and so it's pervasive. There's selection bias in almost all astrological discussions and analysis, and because it's so pervasive and prevalent and is standard, it's standard to have considerable selection bias in the data we're interpreting and presenting in astrology, whether it's an article or a book or a lecture. It's standard to have a lot of selection bias. You have to make an effort and be conscious to step outside that standard way that astrology is done. And to give you a sense of why I say it's standard for there to be considerable selection bias, here's examples of questions that I think demonstrate or indicate how strong it is. How often do astrologers talk about tennis player Steffi Graf when describing Gemini? So astrologers have lectures, books, discussions from, forever on, social media, etc. on zodiac signs. What does Gemini mean? Oh, my girlfriend has Moon in Gemini and and all these observations. Well, how often do we bring up the people who have the most Gemini? The super Gemini people. They're like pure Gemini type energy as close as we can get to it. That would be, for example, Steffi Graf, the tennis player. She's a triple Gemini. Or when we discuss Aquarius, the singer and songwriter Clint Black came out as the #1 Aquarian in a database. So usually we don't even go to databases. We don't select the pure types. We don't have a procedure for selecting charts. We're just sharing the charts we're aware of and our personal observations. So the idea of even using a database and finding out who the super Gemini, the super Aquarius people, etc., is not standard. It's sort of unusual. It's outside the usual scope of how astrology is understood. And therefore, astrology lies mostly outside the modern framework of academia and modern professions, because this is a standard way to confirm how something works. So, in psychology and medicine, in any field, there are attempts made to confirm that our understanding is correct. This is an excellent way to confirm ideas in astrology. It's not done. So, how often is it done? Virtually never, even though these two people have more of the zodiac sign emphasized in their chart than anyone else with AA data. So not doing this is just how selection bias is prevalent in astrology. We're using the charts that occur to us to use, that we've noticed. Okay, so I just want to make that clear what's going on. So if you want to do research, just stepping outside of the usual way astrology is done, of basing our ideas on our personal experience, on our client work, is a huge positive step for better understanding how astrology works for research. So you do not need to do dramatic things to make important contributions to astrology through research. Just by going through a database, finding the super Geminis, super Aquarians, and using them to understand the sign is a huge step. And I will talk more about this because it overlaps with another one of our 11 guidelines for, essential guidelines for astrological research. Okay. Guideline number 6, another essential thing to do when conducting research is to adjust for predictive coding and lack of triangulation. At a minimum, to be aware of how powerful predictive coding and lack of triangulation, how powerful these two things are in affecting our understanding of anything in life, and particularly astrology. So neuroscientists and other scientists are discovering that what we see, what we hear, what we observe is more defined by our expectations than was previously believed. Our brains very often encode what we expect to see rather than provide information about the world. So we know there are optical illusions. We know that we can see things the way our mind is interpreting them, which is actually not a reflection of objective reality. But the extent of this, the extent to which our minds are creating our understanding and our perception is much greater than has generally been recognized. So a simple example is this image where square A is this dark square to the left of this green cylinder. You might be a little difficult to see, but there's a black A. I've got my cursor on it, and a B on this white square. Well, actually, what I'm calling a dark square and a white, almost white square, are actually not dark and white. That's the way our mind interprets them. Those two squares are actually the same exact color. Believe it or not. The optical illusion is so strong that it's difficult to believe that squares A and B are the same color, but they are. When I saw this, I actually did a screen capture and put it into the Paint program, and then I dragged the A and put it next to the B. I had to really convince myself it's true, and they are, as amazing as it seems. This very simple optical illusion, what neuroscientists are putting together through different kinds of research and analysis, is that this is a symptom of something very fundamental to the way the mind works, which is that we have a paradigm. We have a way of comprehending. We have a theoretical framework. We have all of these things. There's different terms for different aspects of this machinery of our minds that puts whatever we see, whatever we hear, whatever we think about, puts it into that framework. That framework that we have for understanding is so powerful that we actually cannot even see things for what they are. We see them only in terms of our cognitive apparatus, our machinery for making sense of it will even dictate what it is we think we're seeing. So the point is that we reinterpret, we redefine what we see and what we hear and what we think about to make it fit our concept of reality. It's so pervasive in so many ways. This is just one visual demonstration of it. That our minds have done a huge number of calculations intuitively and decided that this cylinder is making a shadow, and therefore anything in this shadow is going to look darker than it is, and it's done so many unconscious calculations and taken into so many assumptions that our brain has clearly sees that square B is much lighter than square A, and it is not. Again, I want to emphasize it's not just an entertaining, clever little optical illusion that's just happening because of the way our eyes work. It's the way our brain processes the information and how it processes all information. Here's another dramatic example of an optical illusion where all of these balls are actually the same color. Even though some look green, some look red, some look, bluish, purplish color, they are identical in color, believe it or not. So our minds make adjustments based on these stripes going by them, etc., and sometimes it adjusts in ways that are not actually correct. So these are just simple and somewhat entertaining examples to show what's going on. And amazingly, our ears can hear different things depending on what we are seeing. So there's a video, Can You Trust Your Ears? Audio Illusions on YouTube that gives a good example of this. Again, I have a link to that video in the description of this presentation, so you can watch that. And it's really, again, stunning how you hear different things depending on what you're looking at. How is this relevant to research? It's more relevant than scientists had previously realized. It's not just a little trick optical illusion that's not related to how we think about everything. Everything we're processing and seeing is put into our framework. And with astrology, we have a clear theoretical framework, a way of understanding things. Fire signs are active, water signs this, and the way that we will see the person and then place that information into our concepts, into our ideas, into our way of understanding the world. And without that apparatus for putting things in perspective and putting them in place, we couldn't process information at all. So there's no way around this. This is very important because it emphasizes the importance of being data-driven to get another perspective on what's going on and not having such total trust in whatever we happen to perceive and believe is happening. So this repeats what I've said. So we need different perspectives where different people can complement one another's perceptions rather than just be entrenched in our own position. During every phase of the research, and especially during the exploratory research phase, where many subjective impressions and guesses are involved. So it's helpful to have different people, different astrologers, colleagues, look at what we are looking at and see what they come up with and share ideas and explore possibilities. It helps what's sometimes called triangulation. Triangulation, more literally, is where you have at least three people looking at an object from different points of view, and they're able to tell how far away that object is. Whereas if it's just you looking straight ahead, it can be very difficult. So triangulation helps us see more objectively what we're looking at. Okay, so that's point number 6, the problems of predictive coding, that our minds code, they encode what we're seeing based on what we predict it should be, and the problem of not getting different points of view. Let me read this sentence from the first paragraph. How is it that intelligent people can interpret social, political, and economic events so completely differently that for some Americans, for example, a particular president can be almost faultless, and for others it's almost as if that president has never done anything of any value? How does that happen? How is it that we have these extreme polarities in our understanding of what is happening and what's causing what, and what even the reality is of what occurred? And people on both ends of the spectrum can be amazed that another person who is otherwise fairly intelligent and functioning well can have such erroneous understanding. And this optical illusion gives you a key to understanding how that happens, is that if you have a different set of assumptions and rules and a different cognitive apparatus, you will actually see something differently. And not only just evaluate it differently, your actual perception is different. Anyway, it's a vast problem, and it's why we need research in addition to our personal experience. Looking at data in a database can often shock us out of what we assumed is true. And you know what's interesting? What we found in our research with our research team is as we make discoveries, looking at what's in the data, what does the person with the most Aquarius and the person with the most Gemini, what are they like? What are they doing? What could the Aquarius, what could the Gemini, what could all these zodiac signs mean? As we respond to the data and we bring what we learn from our research to our work with clients, to our looking at charts of friends and family, wow, what a huge improvement. What a dramatic improvement in our communication, in our understanding, in our ability to help our clients. It massively improves because astrology, we find out astrology actually does work, and our understanding of it is very far from perfect. It's not that great compared to what it could be. Okay, so adjusting for predictive coding and lack of triangulation. Just be aware of how all this distorts what we think we're seeing. Point number 7, which is related to point number 6, but a different aspect of it. Avoid being a victim of the ubiquitous pattern recognition. This is another development in neuroscience and psychology, that there's an increasing sense that our brains are amazing pattern recognition machines. Our brains are more designed to detect patterns than they are to detect reality. So we will just see patterns. We will if there's here's an example of why some biologists think we have this acute sensitivity to patterns. Is suppose we are sleeping at night, we hear some noise at night, we jump out of our house or tent, whatever it is we're living in, and we look around and things are a little bit fuzzy. Our ability to get a few cues, a certain shape of something, a few indications, and quickly put it together and say, oh, that's a bear, that's a, whatever kind of animal, or is so helpful for us to be able to quickly identify. As soon as we see a face, we recognize who that person is. Boom. We're able to intuitively and instantaneously assemble and integrate all of this different information to get a conclusion, a pattern, an identification. So our brains are wired to identify things, to see the pattern and instantly identify them. Our ability to do this is so strong that we have what we would call in statistics an extremely high false positive rate for pattern recognition. In other words, in simple terms, we see patterns that aren't there. It's that simple. Our minds would rather see something that isn't there than fail to see something that is there. Because if I think there's a bear outside, this is what the biologists are suggesting. If I think there's a bear outside and there isn't, okay, no problem. I got scared, but no problem. But if there's a bear outside and I don't see it, like a bear is coming at me and I'm sitting there thinking, well, let me see, is that a bear? Is that a dog? What is that thing? Oh, yes, let me see. It's bigger than a dog. It must be a bear. By that time, I'm dead, or whatever, or it's destroyed my house or something. So nature favors high false positive rates for pattern recognition. We're just seeing things that aren't there. So a really great video on this, by the way, is Why Do We See Things That Aren't There by physicist Sabine Hassenfelder. And I have a link to this video as well in the list of videos and links to them in the description for this presentation. So it presents in a very interesting and entertaining way, and I think more convincing way than what I'm explaining here. So basically what's happening is, just as we play the game of what images do you see in the clouds, I think there's almost a universal game played in so many countries. You look up at the clouds and what do you see in it? That game is going on all the time. We're constantly seeing patterns that aren't there. This is very challenging for astrology because we're looking for patterns. We're looking for combinations of astrological factors. Is it that he has a lot of fire in his chart? Is it that the planets are above the horizon? Is it this? Is it that? And the more clever you are, the quicker your brain is, the sharper you are, the smarter you are, the more able you are to find relationships, to find patterns, to find connections, to notice that, all 10 of my clients with ADHD have a Mars above the horizon, or something like this. You're going to notice these things because our brain is wired to find patterns, and there are so many possible patterns that are there. So when you're doing this research, proceed cautiously and slowly with the recognition that a lot of what appears to be happening can just be the cleverness of your brain to find patterns. This problem is so pervasive that what happens is, when people become professional astrologers and they start seeing clients and they start teaching classes, they will inevitably, without a doubt, I've never seen an exception to it, start reporting all kinds of new, exciting insights. And some of them, no doubt, are new, exciting insights. But some are going to be, they're just going to be our pattern recognition sensitivity. Having so many materials to work with, so many possibilities, seeing patterns that may or may not actually be there. Seeing those patterns, detecting them, is a critically important first step in research that we can then validate with research. That is the key. And that's the thing that scientists emphasize over and over and over again, is the testing our ideas. Critically assessing them to make sure that they're really there, because most things we see are actually not there. They just aren't. We're just making connections that seem to be there but aren't. Okay, we are at 28 and a half minutes. I'm going to stop here because we're going to go on to a very, very different topic of how the implicate order and undivided wholeness are obstacles for our research. What we're looking at here are obstacles to our research. Let's backtrack. That we have this acute ability, this incredible ability to recognize patterns, in some ways is working against us. In one way it works for us because we find patterns, but it works against us because most of those patterns actually don't exist. The predictive coding, the triangulation, these are things that are working against our ability to actually find something, to actually detect an actual relationship between the astrological variables and the outcome variables. Okay, in our next video we will discuss how the implicate order and undivided wholeness are also obstacles to making discoveries in astrology. Thank you very much, my friends. God bless. Namaste.